And under no circumstance, we all know this shouldn't have happened. But we understand we're on the bigger and better things.
Shedeur Sanders entered the 2025 NFL Draft as a projected top 5 quarterback. He came out as pick 144 after 3 days of waiting. A prank call, interview rooms that went wrong, and questions about a father whose shadow the NFL could not ignore. Here's what happened. The setup.
That's why I know I'm the best quarterback out there, because I've done it and I proved it.
He said that at the NFL Combine in February 2025. At that point, no significant analytical voice in professional football had a strong argument against him. Shedeur Dion Sanders was born on February 2002 in Tyler, Texas. His father was Dion Sanders, 2-time Super Bowl champion, 8-time Pro Bowler, Pro Football Hall of Famer. Football was not a hobby Shedeur developed. It was the structure of the home he grew up in, shaped early and shaped with intention. He played his first 2 college seasons at Jackson State University in Mississippi, following his father there in 2021, when Dion accepted the head coaching job with no prior college coaching experience on his resume. Shedeur had scholarship offers from other programs. He chose his father. At Jackson State, he won the Jerry Rice Award as the top FCS freshman in the country, led the Tigers to back-to-back SWAC championships and the program's first ever back-to-back Celebration Bowl appearances, and threw for over 3,000 yards with 30 or more touchdowns in each of his 2 seasons there. In 2023, Dion accepted the head coaching job at the University of Colorado. Shedeur transferred with him. The move to Colorado changed the scale of the conversation around him almost overnight. The Buffaloes had historically been one of the quieter programs in the Power 5, a program that had not generated sustained national interest in years and had not had a significant bowl run in over a decade. Dion's arrival pulled the media curtain back in a way that programs with multiple national championships rarely attract. Documentary coverage, transfer portal movement, NIL activity, reality television-style media attention. The entire infrastructure of the Coach Prime brand arrived in Boulder, Colorado, along with a quarterback who was now operating at its center. And Shedeur performed inside that spotlight with the kind of numbers that make it very difficult to argue the moment was too big for him. Across 2 seasons at Colorado, he threw for over 7,300 yards and 64 touchdowns, completing passes at a rate that placed him among the most accurate quarterbacks in college football history over that span. His 4-year career totals stood at 14,353 yards, 134 touchdowns, and just 27 interceptions on a 70.1% completion rate across 50 games. He earned the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award, the Deacon Jones Trophy, Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, second-team All-American. The hardware confirmed what the raw numbers were already saying. He named Tom Brady as the quarterback his game was built around. Not for athleticism, not for arm strength, but for the cerebral dimension of the position, for the ability to break defenses with preparation rather than with physicality.
Tom Brady?
Yeah.
I'm able to see what he has done and mentally how he was able to beat people with the mind.
Tom Brady went to the New England Patriots with the 199th pick of the 2000 NFL Draft, 6th round. One of the last players selected, the comparison was not lost on anyone paying attention to the trajectory being constructed around Shedeur, because Shedeur was pointed in the exact opposite direction. The 2025 quarterback class was considered thin relative to the cycles that had preceded it. Cam Ward from Miami was the consensus #1 quarterback prospect. Shedeur was the clear and agreed upon #2. The Cleveland Browns held the 2nd overall pick. The New York Giants held the 3rd. Both franchises were publicly and repeatedly documented as actively searching for franchise quarterbacks. Mock drafts across ESPN, NFL Network, and every major sports outlet placed Shedeur as high as 2nd overall and rarely outside the first 10 picks. The range was the upper tier of a draft, not the middle. The brand that surrounded those numbers was its own entity by this point. NIL deals had positioned him among the highest value college athletes in the country. Partnerships built on the crossover between his football profile, his father's celebrity, and the kind of organic digital following that most professional athletes spend entire careers trying to cultivate. And in the weeks before the draft, quietly, the signals from inside the league started to run in a different direction than the public projections. Teams that had conducted pre-draft visits and formal meetings with Shedeur were not coming out of those sessions with the kind of resounding enthusiasm that a projected top 5 quarterback pick typically generates. The temperature in front offices, relayed to the few journalists plugged in enough to hear it, was described as hedged, cooler than expected. Not catastrophic, not the language of a complete bust, but noticeably inconsistent with the confidence of the public rankings. The volume of the Sanders story had been absorbing those signals for months, but they were there, running underneath the noise, and they were accumulating.
Well, it's the facts that you need also.
Yeah.
So it's not about confidence. You confidence when you know when it's facts behind it.
He built a custom draft room at home. His father was there, his brothers Dion Jr. and Shiloh, his closest circle. The setup was built for celebration, the architecture of a room that has already absorbed the outcome and is waiting for confirmation. The posture in that room going into draft night was not manufactured. It was the product of a career that had, by every publicly available measure, earned exactly that kind of confidence. What arrived was not the call they were expecting, and the story of why that call never came the way it was supposed to is more than one story. Draft night. The first surprise of the evening landed at pick 2, when the Jacksonville Jaguars stepped to the podium with the second selection of the 2025 NFL Draft. The working assumption, the widely shared, heavily analyzed, publicly stated working assumption, was that at least one of the first 3 teams on the clock would take a quarterback. The Browns had quarterback need. The Giants had quarterback need. The Jaguars, as it happened, also theoretically had quarterback need. The position was in demand at the top of the board in a way that seemed to guarantee an early resolution to the Shedeur story. None of the first 3 franchises took him. Jacksonville at pick 2 selected Travis Hunter, the two-way standout who had played his college career at Colorado under Dion Sanders, a player whose ability to operate at wide receiver and cornerback with equal mastery had made him arguably the single most interesting prospect in the entire class. Pick 3 arrived. The New York Giants. The franchise had perhaps the most exhaustively covered quarterback need in the league, a team that had been searching for a franchise signal caller with genuine urgency for years, and a team that, according to reporting from draft analyst Todd McShay ahead of the event, had conducted a significant private meeting with Shedeur during the pre-draft process. The details of what happened in that room would emerge later. What the Giants communicated with pick 3 was unambiguous. They took Abdul Carter, a pass rusher from Penn State, and did not look back. 2 of the 3 most quarterback-hungry franchises in the draft had used their first-round picks in directions that were not Shedeur Sanders. The air in his draft room had already changed. The round moved forward. Picks accumulated 4, 6, 8, 12. Defensive tackles, offensive linemen, cornerbacks, linebackers, wide receivers, the entire taxonomic range of NFL positions cycling through the board one after another. The Browns made their selection. Then they made their second selection. Neither of them was Shedeur Sanders. When pick 32 was announced and round 1 closed, the rupture in the public narrative was complete. Shedeur Sanders had not been selected in the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft. For a player who had been attached to language like consensus top 10 talent and the clearest second quarterback in the class for the better part of a full calendar year. The omission was not just a surprise. It was a verdict, or at least it read like one. Every analyst with a microphone had to pivot overnight. Every outlet that had spent months building the architecture of a top 5 projection had to explain, in real time, how the framework had been so thoroughly wrong. Day 2 of the draft brought no relief. Round 2 passed without his name. The 3-day wait was covered continuously. Every passing pick was documented. Every hour without a phone call was broadcast. The experience of watching a quarterback the sports media had spent 12 months positioning as a near certainty for the first half of round 1 sit through 3 full days of the draft. Family assembled, rooms set up for celebration, generated a specific kind of public discomfort that most draft stories never reach. During the wait, reports surfaced of a prank call targeting Shedeur during the proceedings, in which someone impersonated an NFL general manager to tell him he had been selected. The incident landed as one of the crueler moments in a draft cycle that had already produced its share of sharp edges. It had stopped being a draft story. It had become a spectacle. Then, on the 3rd day with the 144th selection of the 2025 NFL Draft, the Cleveland Browns called his name. They had traded up from a later pick to select him, a fact that later became its own layer of the argument, with some reading it as evidence of genuine organizational commitment and others pointing out that the Browns had passed on far less expensive opportunities to take him throughout the 3 days leading up to that moment.
Thank everybody for being here. We all didn't expect this, of course, but
he stood in front of his family and kept himself composed. The words he chose were stripped of performance. No manufactured gratitude. No theatrical recovery. No spin applied to the situation to make it look like anything other than what it was.
And under no circumstance, we all know this shouldn't have happened. But we understand we're on the bigger and better things.
We know this shouldn't have happened. Not a reframe, not a recovery narrative, a plain publicly stated acknowledgement that the outcome did not match the projection, and a pivot forward that was either the response of someone who had genuinely processed the weight of 3 days in 4 sentences, or someone who understood that the only available move was to face it directly and keep walking. The film problem. every fall in the draft has a football component. That is not because football is always the dominant reason a player slides. Sometimes it is not, and this story will reach what else was happening. But the football questions that NFL teams had about Shedeur Sanders were real, specific, and carefully documented by the evaluators who spent time on his tape. To understand the full picture, you begin there, because the professional evaluation of any quarterback begins there. Regardless of name, regardless of narrative, regardless of what the highlights show. The concern that surfaced most consistently from the scouting and evaluation community was a deeply ingrained tendency to hold the ball too long and absorb unnecessary sacks. At Colorado, across 2 seasons against Power 5 competition that included legitimate NFL-caliber pass rushers, Shedeur absorbed a volume of sacks that scouts began cataloging not as circumstantial, not as bad luck in specific games against specific pass rushes, but as a pattern rooted in his mechanics and decision-making under pressure. In college football, a quarterback with enough anticipation and arm talent to squeeze throws into windows a fraction of a second before the pocket fully collapses can survive that tendency. The operating margins are wider, the pass rushers are slower to convert speed into sacks. The quarterback who holds an extra beat and still completes the pass is not exposing a career-limiting flaw. In the NFL, that extra beat is a sack. That pattern across a full season becomes a statistics problem and a film problem. He acknowledged it himself without being prompted in the directness that had always been one of the defining qualities of his public presentation.
I'm a product of kind of what I had to adjust to.
I know, your pass protection sucked.
That word drift describes something visible in the tape that went beyond the sack numbers themselves. When his drop-back mechanics broke down under pressure, what replaced the structured footwork was not the improvisational scrambling that modern dual-threat quarterbacks use to extend plays in positive ways. It was a kind of lateral instability in the pocket, a tendency to drift sideways into pressure rather than step up through it, which collapses a quarterback's throwing platform and forces the arm to compensate for the feet. The mechanical result, for scouts watching his tape frame by frame, was inconsistency under pressure in precisely the area where NFL defenses are designed to exploit inconsistency. And that context mattered because the Colorado offensive line was considered one of the weaker units in the Power 5 conference during his time there. A significant number of the sacks accumulated against his name could be reasonably attributed to protection failure rather than individual hesitation at the point of decision. NFL scouts evaluating his tape understood that distinction. Beyond the sack rate and the footwork questions, his athletic profile introduced another layer to the evaluation conversation. None of this in isolation was sufficient to push a consensus top 10 talent to the 5th round. Quarterbacks with similar athletic profiles and similar arm grades have gone in the first 15 picks across multiple drafts over the past decade. The film concerns were real, but they were the starting point of the fall, not its full explanation. His pro day performance, which scouts attended in the weeks before the draft, did not produce the kind of ringing, doubt-erasing reactions that can rewrite a narrative in the final stretch. The sessions were covered, the tape questions remained, the footwork questions remained, and the evaluators walked into the pre-draft interview process carrying those questions into rooms where the answers they received made everything they had already seen on film significantly more alarming. The football story is where the fall started. The interview story is where it accelerated. The interview disaster. The NFL pre-draft interview process exists to answer one specific question that film cannot answer on its own. What is this player like when the lights are off and no one is cheering? In the college environment, and particularly in the environment that Shedeur had operated in for 4 years, where the cameras were always present, the family name amplified every moment, and the program had been built to serve as a stage for exactly the kind of talent he brought. The version of a player that emerges under competitive conditions is mediated by all of that. Based on what leaked to the press in the days before and after the 2025 draft, those rooms did not go well for Shedeur Sanders. Anonymous reports from NFL executives and assistant coaches began appearing in national outlets in the final weeks of the draft cycle, and the picture they painted was pointed, specific, and given the source anonymity, impossible for Shedeur or his camp to refute through direct rebuttal. One longtime NFL assistant coach described his session with Shedeur as, "That quote ran far," but the specifics attached to it were equally damaging in the context of what NFL franchises evaluate in a quarterback.
He takes unnecessary sacks, never plays on time, horrible body language, blames teammates.
Entitlement, body language, blaming teammates. In a league where the quarterback is the most consequential relationship builder in any organization, those are not footnote concerns. They are the core of what every franchise trying to invest in a signal caller is trying to assess. The most specifically documented incident involved the New York Giants. Todd McShay reported before the draft that a white chalkboard session between Shedeur and Giants head coach Brian Daboll had not produced the kind of mutual engagement that a franchise making a top 3 pick requires. The details of what happened in that room were not fully disclosed publicly. But when Daboll was asked about the session at a post-draft press conference, he responded in the careful, deliberate language of someone who had something specific to say and had decided the moment after the pick was not the place to say it. He did not deny, he moved on. And in NFL circles, the way he moved on was read as confirmation that something notable had occurred. Other reports pointed to a pattern across multiple sessions, a framing that, in the context of a professional film session designed to assess whether a prospect can identify and own errors in his own decision-making, read as a fundamental unwillingness to do that, not an inability, an unwillingness.
It's the Tebow effect.
Right.
It's the exact same thing that got teams to the point where we don't want this guy on our depth chart.
The argument being made, first in private front office conversations and then increasingly in media analysis, was that the Sanders name had reached a scale of public attention where placing him on a roster created structural complications for the entire franchise that existed entirely separately from his production or his play.
Good enough to be a third-string quarterback, and that's
Yeah.
debatable.
Right.
But even if he is, we don't want that. We don't want the reporters rushing past our starter.
And then something happened that always happens in NFL draft cycles when a story reaches a certain mass. The conversation spread laterally. Teams with no quarterback need began comparing notes with teams that had it. Teams that had not interviewed Shedeur were receiving second and third-hand accounts of what teams that had interviewed him were saying. Each retelling carried the original concern further from its source and attached it to the general consensus with increasing authority. By the time the draft started, what had begun as specific accounts from specific rooms had metastasized into a broadly shared conviction that the interview process had been badly mishandled. Shedeur had lived with doubt his entire life, and he had built his entire career on the habit of answering it by performing. The criticism was not new. The narrative that he could not do it without his father's system, without his father's name, without the protected environment of a coaching structure designed to serve him. That narrative had followed him from high school. He had answered it at Jackson State, and then he had answered it again at Colorado.
You know, they said I couldn't do it in high school, and I did it. They said I couldn't do it in Jackson, I did it.
The NFL, however, is not a stage where past performance in other environments earns you runway. The conference rooms of 32 franchises had reached a conclusion that the production had not changed, and underneath every piece of that conclusion, invisibly and irreversibly, was the question of the father, because the father was not a background character in this story, he was the whole architecture of it. After the fall, the name Sanders was not only an asset heading into the 2025 NFL Draft. In the private language of league front offices, it had simultaneously become one of the more specific liabilities attached to any prospect in the class. Not because of anything Shedeur had done on the field, not entirely because of the interview reports, but because of the very precise institutional fear that assembles itself around any organization that considers signing a player whose father is the most visible coach in college football is by temperament and history incapable of staying silent when he believes something is wrong, and has spent the last 4 years demonstrating that his idea of the right way to handle adversity is to walk directly toward the cameras and say exactly what he thinks, loudly, on whatever platform will carry it. Reports from multiple teams and executives pointed consistently to what they described as Dion drama as a factor in their evaluation. The concern was not abstract or theoretical. It had a very specific institutional shape. If Shedeur struggled, if the offensive coordinator's play calling did not suit his strengths, if the team went through a losing stretch that generated, should we make a change at quarterback coverage, what would Dion do? The answer that the collective memory of every journalist who had covered Coach Prime for 3 years supplied was not trust the process and remain quiet. The answer was he would say something. He would say it publicly. He would say it in a way that put organizational dynamics directly into the national media cycle. And in an industry where the relationship between a head coach and his quarterback is one of the most delicate and high-stakes partnerships in professional sport, the prospect of a Hall of Famer with a TV presence and a social media audience inserting himself into that relationship from the outside was enough to make franchises pause. Stephen A. Smith said plainly on national television that teams did not want to deal with his father. Robert Griffin III articulated the specific fear that head coaches worried about being replaced by Dion if Shedeur performed well enough to justify the conversation and the owner was emotionally invested enough in the son's success to entertain it. The nepotism conversation had been part of the family's story since the moment Dion walked into Jackson State carrying his son's commitment papers.
And you point it to your son and you say, well, there's your quarterback. And people are like, man, that's nepotism. His son ain't done nothing in Colorado.
That ain't up to, that's real.
Dion's position was always that the production spoke for itself, and the production did back him up. The wins were real, the stats were real, the awards were real. But the question that nepotism conversations in professional sports always circle back to is not whether the beneficiary is talented. It is whether the platform that amplified that talent would have been constructed in the same form for a different person with equivalent talent who did not share the architect's last name. Dion later revealed he had been battling bladder cancer during the period of the draft, a diagnosis he had kept from his sons specifically so that they would remain focused during the most consequential period of their careers. He later said Shedeur had endured hell. That word carried more weight than most people reading it in isolation understood. After the draft, Shedeur made a request of his father that said everything about where he needed to go from that moment. He asked Dion not to come to Brown's training camp. He wanted to earn his place inside an organization on terms that were entirely his own, without the presence of a father whose arrival would, by the sheer force of the attention it generated, make it impossible for Shedeur to be just a player competing for a spot. Dion respected it. What followed at the professional level was the kind of complicated rookie year that the circumstances produced. The Browns already had a veteran quarterback in Deshaun Watson, whose own trajectory through the league had been shaped by injury and league suspension in ways that had left the franchise in an ambiguous personnel situation. Shedeur competed within that environment, a fifth-round pick who had been the consensus second-best quarterback in the draft, operating as a backup in an organization that had invested almost nothing in his selection relative to what the pre-draft projections had implied his price should be. When he played, there were moments that looked like exactly what the accuracy metrics and the processing grades had always suggested they would look like: a standout performance against the Tennessee Titans, where he threw for 364 yards with multiple touchdowns and added a rushing score. A performance that, against a better supporting cast and within a more favorable team situation, would have generated a very different conversation about his potential trajectory. And there were weeks that looked like the scouting reports: turnovers, inconsistency under pressure, the footwork and decision-making concerns surfacing in real time against professional pass rushers with no patience for an extra beat in the pocket. The season produced 7 touchdowns and 10 interceptions in limited starts, a QBR grade in the territory of historically difficult performances for rookie quarterbacks. Honest numbers, not manufactured. The team finished poorly. The coaching staff was restructured. By 2026, under new head coach Todd Monken, Shedeur entered OTAs and minicamp, generating a different set of descriptions from the organization. Browns general manager Andrew Berry used the word phenomenal to describe his growth. The pre-snap reads were faster. The footwork was cleaner. The release was quicker. He was splitting first-team reps with Watson and winning some of those competitions, a detail that, inside the controlled context of spring practice, is not a guaranteed indicator of anything, but is not nothing either.
But I feel like with God, anything possible, everything possible, and under no circumstance, we all know this shouldn't happen. But we understand we on the bigger and better things.
At 24 years old, Dion Sanders has time to rewrite his story. The question of whether what happened to him at the 2025 draft was sad depends on how you interpret it. Was it sad because a young man's expectations were not met? Or was it sad because a young man had the tools to meet them but did not do the work? The answer to that question is where the real sadness lies, and that answer is his to determine going forward.